Now, we've got some big breaking news coming in here on India Today. Russia has declared a temporary ceasefire in Ukraine. A temporary ceasefire in all combat operations in Ukraine right now. The ceasefire has come into effect from 11:30 a.m. today, and it will be in effect for about 5.5 hours, we are told. Basically 6 a.m. GMT to 11:30 a.m. GMT, which basically means 11:30 a.m. India time onwards. So half hour ago, a ceasefire has come into effect. It has declared a ceasefire after a global rap over humanitarian, over civilians being, in danger and in the line of fire. Several civilian deaths appear to have forced Russia to call into effect a temporary ceasefire of about 5.5 hours, starting from 11:30 today, which will go on till early in the evening India time. All firing, all shelling, all cruise missiles will come to a standstill as Russia opens up humanitarian civilian corridors so that civilians are able to move out from the actual combat zone. Big breaking news here on India Today. It's the first ceasefire that has taken place so far in 10 days of non-stop conflict, non-stop shelling and bombing in different cities of Ukraine. We're awaiting more details of this breaking story, but a 5.5-hour ceasefire has been called in and declared by Russia, which has encircled many cities. It has taken one city, Kherson. It's about to take another city, Mariupol, probably. Kharkiv is about to fall. Chernihiv is being bombed to a large extent. Places like Zhytomyr and others are also being shelled mercilessly. Kiev has been encircled by a military convoy. There could be attacks on Kiev city next. And now the Russian government has announced a temporary ceasefire on day 10 of the invasion of Ukraine. It's a very brief ceasefire. And just to explain to our viewers, a ceasefire means precisely that. All cessation of combat and conflict activities, military operations will stop so that humanitarian corridors can be opened up for civilians to be moved to safety. Remember, this is not a total ceasefire, which means operations to encircle cities may actually continue, but firing will stop. All firing, no use of weaponry, no use of shelling, no use of cruise missiles, no air attacks, no machine guns of any kind will be engaged for a window of 5.5 hours. This is to allow humanitarian civilian corridors. Russia has come under global criticism for the civilian deaths that have taken place in the line of fire over the last 10 days. Remember, Russia has blamed Ukraine for the civilian deaths and said that Ukraine has been using civilians as human shields in this entire conflict. It has kept its own leadership behind the lines of civilian defenses, and therefore collateral damage was always going to be a possibility. Russia has insisted that it has made every effort to avoid civilian casualties, but the nature of conflict, the nature of war, especially in built-up urban centers, has meant there have always been civilian casualties. Remember, India lost a medical student as well in one such incident of shelling in the city of Kharkiv. 5.5-hour breather in the Russian offensive is what we're breaking to our viewers at this point of time. It comes on day 10, after 10 days of incessant, high-intensity, escalating military operations in Ukraine. President Putin has called for a 5.5-hour ceasefire in Ukraine aimed at allowing civilians to leave. Remember, Russia has been the recipient and the target of a near non-stop series of sanctions, pressures, criticisms, companies pulling out, companies shutting down, operations of many global conglomerates ceasing operations in Russia. So Russia has been increasingly isolated. And with the news reports of civilian deaths, piling up in different cities of Ukraine, that has only added to the global outrage, to the global perception war as far as Russia is concerned, and therefore this could be to try and address that. President Putin announcing a 5.5-hour ceasefire in Ukraine to get humanitarian corridors activated so that civilians can leave these places. On the back of this, the Russian government will be able to claim that it has done everything it can to ensure civilians are not in the firing zones. And if any civilians remain after this, the claim war will basically move to an extent where the Russian government will be able to claim that Ukrainians and the Ukrainian government has deliberately kept civilians back, even though they had the opportunity to move them out because they wanted to use them as human shields. That's what the situation is right now. It's a dynamic situation. It's escalating and moving rapidly. But for now, the amount of firing, the amount of shelling, perhaps even the air raid sirens are going to fall silent for about 5.5 hours as the Ukrainian government and several agencies on the ground look to evacuate cities of civilians as quickly as possible. Remember, a ceasefire of this kind to allow civilians to leave also means that the Russian military, which is on the ground in Ukraine in large numbers, is possibly preparing for a larger attack to take over these cities. With civilians there, it's difficult to attack because of the collateral damage concerns, because of the human casualty concerns. They've been happening in many cities, but the Russians, who are now on the back foot, have declared a 5.5-hour ceasefire in order to open up those humanitarian corridors. India Today's Rajesh Pawar on the ground in Kyiv. Big breaking story. Rajesh, 5.5-hour ceasefire called by the Russians. No firing, no combat activity in any part of Ukraine for 5.5 hours, starting from about half hour ago, to allow humanitarian corridors to open. What can you tell us, Rajesh?
Good morning, Shiv. What I can tell you from Kyiv is it was a very calm night. No firing, no shelling, no missiles last night. It was a calm morning today, and there was no fighting in this area. So I believe here there have been no military activity on the outskirts of Kyiv last night or today morning. About other cities, I'm not sure right now, but yes, yesterday we saw huge number of people leaving the city. The train station was fully crowded. There was no place to park cars outside the main train station here. And I believe it was the same situation in all the cities which are witnessing fight right now or which are likely to witness fighting in coming days. Shiv.
About this ceasefire that has just been announced by the Russians, are you hearing anything about it, Rajesh? We also have Geeta, who's live with us from Lviv. We're going to go to her in just a moment. Really good to see Geeta. Just wanted to tell you that Geeta, our foreign affairs editor, is also in Ukraine. She's going to be live with us. But Rajesh, about this ceasefire announcement, anything you're hearing about that? 5.5 hours.
Look, Shiv, if you remember, all the time, Russian media and the Russian government and their media people have been saying it, have been repeating it all the time, that they do not want any kind of civilian casualties and that they are not targeting civilian areas. In fact, today the Russian government announced that anybody spreading fake news about attacks on civilian areas, which is not true, there is an imprisonment of up to 15 years. So, and let me tell you, this war has witnessed one of the highest amount of fake news, fake videos, fake photos being circulated even on mainstream media around the world. So this is to prevent that, and this reinforces the Russian claim that they care for human life, that they are not here in Ukraine for civilian casualties. They do not want civilians to suffer. In fact, they do not want anyone who lays down their arm or who does not want to be a part of this fighting to suffer at all. And this reinforces their claim, and this gives them a kind of moral high ground. Shiv.
Very, very interesting analysis and very important. There's a lot of messaging involved in everything that's happening here. There's an operational aspect, there's a messaging aspect, and this huge war of claims. Rajesh, stay with me.